apart from that, the thing is that one just needs to kind of make it up, in a sense. There's a kind of like, oh, well, I need to be able, well, I've got to earn some money, correct, so I better just do this then, or I better do that. So there's less kind of conscious choosing, but in that there's a kind of freedom and a capacity to be okay with making it up.
Welcome to the Less Trodden Path podcast, a dedication to untangling the world in a raw and honest way, following your gut and your dreams, no matter what they may be. Often they are different to what is known as the norm, a step out of the comfort zone, the path less tread. We are here to help inspire you to take your own path by sharing both our own journey and the stories of others too, making it clear along the way that anyone can do it, whatever it may be, with all the ups and downs, the good, the bad, the pretty, the ugly included. Dreams take time, but if you put your all into it, time doesn't mean anything. This week we speak with Sam. He is a multi-modal dance movement psychotherapist who is not just highly qualified in academia, but also highly experienced in life. Sam shares his journey from becoming a dad at just 18 all the way through to his current 50th year, where, despite having the family, the business, and everything else to name on the list, still has so much desire to achieve and share. He talks us through his handmade life and how embracing the mess that comes with being a creative soul can lead to extraordinary experiences that might even be the secret to maintaining a full head of hair. Sam is inspiring and powerful, and someone everyone can learn from. Here is Sam's very own Less Trodden Path.
Places to go. I'll be spending all my time living out my bucket list.
Throw it at us. Because we were looking up on your websites over the last few days just to kind of get to know a little bit more, and we've seen like a huge list of things that you kind of offer and do, and it just is so interesting. So like, how did you get here from wherever you want to start? Kind of, obviously we're called the Less Trodden Path in the sense of like, it's your own path, right? No one else has your path, and you've done some awesome things. You've probably done some crazy things. There's probably been some highs as well as lows. You obviously have your own business, and there's been ups and downs there. Like, this is almost an inspiration for anyone and everyone who kind of wants to follow their own path. But as a reminder that it really is, it's an awesome path, but it's not a straight path, and there's no destination.
Yeah. Yeah, and it all, well, in one sense, I suppose my adult path started when I became a dad at the age of 18. So if anyone wants any advice, if you what really to do or not to do is become a parent at the age of 18. Wow. And so I have a beautiful son who's now 30. He's 6'4", and I would like to think he's at least as challenging as I was or am. To me. And what to say? I guess. Well, in one sense, I mean, obviously, I was going to say that my story, begins like with the speech at my second marriage, which was absolutely terrible, where I kind of stood up and I hadn't thought about what I wanted to say, and then I said something like, I'd really like to thank my mum and my dad, and I'd like to thank my mum for giving birth to me, at which point, like, all the wedding guests in the audience just kind of went into a dumb silence, where before everyone was just drinking champagne and thinking about wedding cake. And but really, in a sense, it kind of, it does start, I guess, with having had three main loves of my life. The first one being Dion's mum, Jemima, having met in school. That's a very bizarre story. because I walked into this classroom at the age of 13, having just switched schools from what I found to be a terrible secondary school, just in Glastonbury, where I grew up.
Wow.
And my brother and I would move to another school, partly because my brother came home one day covered in blood, literally, and the school were just not looking after us. So basically, I arrive in this classroom, and I'm there with my acrylic jumper on, and a very unfashionable haircut, and I see this girl in the class who I recognize from a dream that I've had a couple of years earlier, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, she's an angel. A therapist a few years ago said, well, she wasn't really just an angel, was she? She was also a bit of a devil. There was it certainly wasn't an angelic experience for not either of us being together for 10 years as we were. But so what? And the backstory to that is that at Glastonbury Festival, I was 10 or 11 years old, and I walked past her while she was having her photograph taken, and I then had a dream about her that night. And I dreamt to myself, I fell in love with her in my dream. I mean, I don't know what I was smoking. I mean, it was Glastonbury Festival, and I was probably too young, but then probably many people were. But anyway, I discovered so I walked into this classroom, and there she was, the girl from my dream, and I was even convinced that she might even have like wings, I was like, I don't know what I was on. But anyway, I was having a psychedelic childhood, and then we somehow got together, at school. That's another funny story how we got together. But anyway, Dion came out, and he was a boy, and this was crazy, and I hadn't even told anyone my dream at this point. And I thought, but then when he came out and he was a boy, I was like, well, this is quite something. And then we were looking through family photo albums at her mum's house, and we found a photograph of her and her sister with me walking past in the background.
Wow.
That's hilarious.
At the age of like 10 or something, and so it really had happened that somehow I'd seen her, had this fantasy, had a dream, and then but anyway, then we separated. And that was that was crushing for me. Well, partly because, obviously my dream wasn't going to come true then, was it? That I was supposed to have a boy and then a girl with this woman who I definitely found out at that point wasn't an angel. And then what happened was we got back together again, and we had a girl who is Olivia, my second child.
Sweet.
Now, obviously, we grew apart. Some people get together really young, and they manage to grow together in a sense, and they give each other enough light and shade to make everything work. Other people just kind of go that, and so while we were good at school together, and we supported each other through challenging times. We were just very different people when we separated. When the kids when we finally separated, when the kids were about 8, 9, 10, that kind of age.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
So that's an unusual story, isn't it? Most relationships don't quite begin like that.
Yeah. It's also crazy when you say about the photo, and it just makes me think, like, how many other photos are you in that you'll never know about? When you think about it, like, even just looking at photos that you have around your house, and you perhaps see someone in the background, and it's just like, who is that person, and why are they in my photo, and like, who else's house am I in around the world that I'll never know about?
Yeah.
it's fascinating. But
Intriguing. Yeah.
just a little off topic there. It just made me think of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's that 7 degrees of separation thing, isn't it? And if we really understood how much of a human family we are, there's no way we would be able to behave towards each other in the kinds of ways that we do. And, so I guess having kids really young, it shook my world, didn't it? I couldn't just carry on being a kind of middle class, hippie, studenty person. I had to go out and work, and I discovered what it was like to be on a building site and a demolition site, and to become a tree surgeon, and to do all the other things that I needed to do to try and support a couple of kids as much as possible. And then I studied at night school, so I got my A-levels at night school, and then we all went to London. So that was so myself, Jemima, my first wife, and Dion and Olivia, and I managed to somehow get into UCL, which to study philosophy. Which I just absolutely loved, but it was exhausting as well with two small kids.
Yeah, I bet.
Definitely.
Yeah.
A bit different to some of the other students that were probably around you.
Yeah, they were kind of sit-ins happening at that point. Like, looking at student politics now is very kind of tame, but so my contemporaries had taken over the whole finance department of UCL, and they they just weren't letting anyone else in there. And I really wanted to join in, but I'd kind of like, stand and watch from the outside a bit and think, well, the thing is, that's all right for you all to do that, but I've got like 2 small kids at home and a wife who's going to be really pissed off if I don't come home.
Yeah. How old were you? At this, How old were you at this time?
20. I was like 21, about 21.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. That's young.
Yeah.
That's very young. But wow, So what did you kind of? Because did you like finish that qualification that you did at university then, or is that a part of what you do now, or did you kind of go down a different route?
I kind of still went on the same route. I mean, I think because I was drawn to this idea of the less trodden path, or that sense, or what I like to call it is a handmade life, which comes from the work of Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote that wonderful book, Women Who Run with Wolves. I mean, it could be anyone, now in less gender defined ways, times. It could be anyone who just does their thing. So I had this idea that if I really felt strongly that I needed to do something, then I would try and find a way to do it. And I was inspired by a sculptor who I was working for as a life model, who'd studied at UCL. And he said to me, look, you're really bored working on building sites and stuff. You need to get back to school. And I'd say, oh, no, I can't do that. I'm knackered when I get home and so on. And, and he was like, no, come on, you've got to do this. And maybe, why don't you try out UCL? That would be good for you. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. But he talked me into it. And I then just studied what I wanted to study, which, was political philosophy and European politics and German literature. So I'd grown up bilingual. And I thought, well, the German would be an easy option. And the other stuff might be hard. I tried to take a unit in statistics, and in the first 2 hours realized that I would utterly fail if I stayed in that lecture hall. So I left and changed. I was like, no, don't let me do that. Then I tried to take a whole unit in Shakespeare, because I tried to talk my lecturer, who was trying to guide me through the course, into letting me do Shakespeare, because there's loads of philosophy in Shakespeare and it's all about politics, and and she was like, okay, well, you can go to the English department if you want, but I'm going to kick you off my course. And so I said, okay, no, I don't want to do that. And so it was a bit of kind of trying to follow the winding path of my heart, and just doing it because I felt passionate about it.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I feel so sad about the idea of the government mandating, reducing kind of creative arts degrees. I was just reading that they're cutting history in 2 more, English universities. I think it's a terrible idea. We don't want to all end up being scientists. We need scientists, but even scientists don't want everybody to be a scientist. So,
and everyone's not made for it, right? Like, each for their own. You should just be wise. Like, everyone should just be allowed to just do what they're made for, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. And I had this like latter part of my education at a Steiner school, and I went on to work in a couple of different Steiner inspired places. I was a manager and a skills trainer in emotional literacy and stuff at a large Steiner based college, as well as working for a small kind of Steiner based school for a number of years. And there it really seemed to me that the main thing about Steiner's insights, and he was a clairvoyant, so this is already fairly far out there, but remarkable author and thinker, was that the society of tomorrow needs the people of today to become who they can be inside themselves in order for renewal to happen. So it's really important that we allow each other and support each other to discover what we're passionate about, because that will enable evolution to take place. Without it, we'll go in more and more into fragmentation. And of course, we're in a time when it's something that obviously I think about as a psychotherapist, as a creative arts psychotherapist. We're in a time of environmental breakdown, which means that we really need the people of tomorrow to discover what their passions are today, so that they can give the world what it needs, rather than what the old world thought it needed.
No.
Yeah. It's very easy to get, I think humans in general get very caught up in the idea that the way they know things to be should be how it is, and that people forget that throughout the entire history of everything, it's always changing. It's never stationary. Life never stops in one place, and a model that was yesterday isn't necessarily going to be the model tomorrow. And I think that it's very easy for people to get lost in the idea that the way they know the world to be is the way it will remain, as opposed to it's always going to change. And I guess, like you say, I mean, witnessing how, like, from your perspective, like, how do you see it evolving? How do you have a, in someone in your position, I guess?
Well, I guess a way that I see it evolving, I like the work of Joanna Macy, who's a kind of remarkable. I think she's about 90 now, and if you ever get to listen to one of her the podcasts on her or read any of her stuff, she's just incredible. And she talks about this kind of a great turning, in a sense, and that the way that human beings evolve is by edging it. We get to we kind of, and that's just the way it is, and we may or may not fall off. We just don't know. But we really need to know where we are. We need to know that we're on the edge of a precipice, and that some of us are falling off already, and we need to and we have the capacity for transformation. And transformation, I think, is particularly linked to creativity.
Yeah.
Because creativity comes, in a sense, from the inside out. In terms of our human responses, if we think of in all kinds of areas, including trauma, which I'm interested in, and in general kind of development and growth, you don't need to tell your teeth to grow. They just do it. You don't need to. So there's so creativity is really interesting. Like, what is it? Well, we know that creativity is kind of messy. So we need to let go of control in order for creativity to happen. But letting go of control is scary. So we create schemas and maps. And, even great thinkers kind of create schemas and maps for other people so that they can reduce their anxiety. But as Krishnamurti said, many years ago, and I was fortunate enough to meet him when I was a kid at Brockworth Park, he said, you have to find it inside yourself again. We have to find our creative source. In a sense, we have to long for it enough in order to be able to let go of other people's maps for us. Of course, he was trying to get out of his own map of being a guru, and he never didn't quite manage to do that, regardless of how strongly he tried. He was kind of mapped in, and so there's this kind of combination of mapping and structure and creativity. And obviously when we're too anxious, we need more structure, and when we're feeling really fun and free, then we need more creativity. And we need, I guess, people to guide us on that journey, who know that the maps they give are never going to be good enough, because we're evolving into something new, because the world, the universe itself, of course, is on a creative journey.
Yeah.
Like you said, we don't know what tomorrow will be, and we don't know who tomorrow will need, in a sense, but we do know that we're part of that. So if we can connect to our own inner creativity, draw maps that give us an indication, a sense of safety, and a sense of the general direction, then we need to be free within that. And that means being creative, and that means being messy. Those are things that I like.
Yeah, that's cool. I agree. I think it's really important. It's an important message. I think the importance of creativity itself, something that I'm always banging on about. I think that it's too in a box, in a sense. A lot of people think that creativity is something you either have or you don't, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think everyone's creative. It's just about sort of, like you said, finding a way to awaken it within you and then running with it when you feel it. It's fascinating. So where did you go from this sort of degree life with kids and trying to figure, how did you navigate your own, journey in that sense? From where we were?
Well, I was offered a part-time teaching post and an MA at the university, and I turned it down and went to work in a plant and tree nursery in the countryside.
Awesome.
And that was a relief. Oh, it was so lovely just to be in nature.
Yeah.
And my wife wasn't well at the time, and it was a kind of like a rescue decision, really. It was like, I have to rescue us. We're, as a family, we're not doing well. And that was the right decision to make. I think it was difficult for me to let go of philosophy and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I also really needed to get into my body. And one of the first things I did then, as well as working in this nursery, was I went back to the sculptor who I'd been working for, and we did like a body painting exploration, and basically turned me into a kind of woadish kind of warrior type being. There was quite a lot of blue involved, and it felt like in a sense kind of taking off that whole academic thing and that over intellectualization, and just kind of letting go of that and just being a body again, and coming back to nature, and in a sense, I suppose, coming back full circle to doing kind of building work and landscaping, but in a slightly nicer kind of way. And then from that, I then went into working in special needs education. And then I started training as a reflexologist, and I then got really into that. So I was just doing that pretty much full time, which was quite hard in a small town. So I never had any money, but I was very determined, stubborn, ambitious. And so that included training other people to be reflexologists and doing like postgraduate courses for people in reflexology, which I was then doing as body reflexology, because my mind was constantly like, oh well, hold on a minute, it's not just about the feet, is it? It's also about the hands and the face and then the ears and then well, the whole of the body actually is a communicative, relational thing. And so there was something about coming back into my body again, I suppose, from having been kind of educated up to here to one tiny corner of my brain. I had to like find my way back down and in. So that was that.
How long were you at the nursery for? Was it the nursery that it's called? The garden?
Yeah, I think I was only there for about 9 months or so, or a year, until I got really bored.
Yeah, and was that like a bit of like a community, for example? So like, you go there and you just, was it like a paid work, or was it volunteering?
It was a paid. Yeah. It was just a friend of mine at the time. He's really, really obsessed by trees, and he needed someone to help him in his nursery.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
And then so you said you were there for like 9 months, and then up until you kind of did this reflexology and stuff, you know, how long roughly did that kind of take to, you know, develop? Because assuming you were, when you first kind of started this, you were 18 and then 21, and then, you know, is this like a year later, or
Right,
is this over
so
several
21,
years?
so I was 24 when I finished my degree.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was in 1999.
Yeah.
Maths is not my strong point. So, yeah, so about then.
Somewhere around then.
And then it was, well, then after a number of months at the nursery, I then went into the special needs education, which then, and at the same time I studied in the reflexology.
Okay.
And I then became a kind of the main carer for my two kids, Dion and Livy, for a couple of years. So like 1 year on my own, pretty much, and then with my second wife, kind of on the scene for the next year. And then I was still the main carer, but then my second wife and I by then were living together because we had another child. So at that point, I had a kind of a stepdaughter and my two kids who I was looking after, and then my second wife became pregnant, and and then she became ill, and then I had like lots of children to look after, and I was being a kind of part-time reflexologist and teaching that and so on. So it was very messy.
Yeah. I mean,
Messy.
I couldn't even imagine having one kid, let alone so many, as well as trying to figure, you know, you're still pretty young, right? So still trying to figure kind of yourself out and what, not even necessarily work-wise, but just in general in life, kind of, you know, what you wanted to do, still just trying to figure things out as a whole. And it just sounds incredible, but also a little bit hectic, but not necessarily in a bad way, if that even makes sense.
There were. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was just very interesting. I guess that one of the things about not having a kind of salaried career, in a sense, although I did have a salaried career for 7 years as a manager and trainer, in a sense, apart from that, the thing is that one just needs to kind of make it up, you know, in a sense. There's a kind of like, oh, well, I need to be able, well, I've got to earn some money, correct, so I better just do this then, or I better do that. So there's less kind of conscious choosing, but in that there's a kind of freedom and a capacity to be okay with making it up. That my dad always said, oh God, I don't know how do you even do that? Like, I would be terrified, you know, even though he was a very well qualified, you know, architect, he could have struck out on his own, but he was always too scared to do that. And I guess that goes back to the early childhood dream, doesn't it? That in a sense I was following my dream. My mum was a psychotherapist, and she was always banging on about Jung and the importance of our dreams, and And so, somehow I took that really seriously at a young age. I mean, I did read the whole Ring cycle at the age of 11 or 12. So I was an unusual kid, and I guess it helps if we have a dream, doesn't it? Like, my dream was to have those 2 kids. So when I was faced with the reality of having 2 kids, and then even me being the main carer for a bit, and then handing them back again, and the struggles that being an underdeveloped parent, and the struggles of that, and the loveliness, the beauty of it, was kind of like, well, I kind of dreamt it, so it was still important to me, on some level or other, even when I was in the middle of the middle of the compost heap of,
Wow.
Wow. So, go on.
No, you go. You got questions?
No, I was just gonna say, like, obviously you now have your own business, right? So when did that kind of come about? How long did that take to actually, when did that kind of kick off? How old were you, and how long did it take to set up, but also to get out into the world? Because again, it doesn't just happen in a click. So how did that kind of come about?
Oh, right. Well, funnily enough, it kind of did happen it did happen very easily. But probably because I'd already had my own business a number of different times. So I'd already had I had a tree surgery and landscaping business, but I had a very kind of Marxist view of employees, which wasn't very useful, really. So I'd always try and split my fees halfway down the middle. So whoever was working for me would get half of what I earned, which wasn't a very good idea. So that was like the first business, in a sense. The second business I had was the body work and healing business. So I also did a spiritual healing diploma somewhere in the middle there in my 20s. And so I brought that in, and that business was more successful. Well, I found it more sustainable than the tree surgery stuff, because the tree surgery stuff, you just look at old guys who've been doing it too long and think, oh no, it's not what you want to do. And so I'd already had that business, and then the other business, and then my current business of providing creative arts psychotherapy to schools and care homes in Bristol just came about because someone said, have you got any more time for us? And I said no, sorry, I'm full up, but I can find I'll find another therapist for you if you like, and I'll manage them. And so I guess it was a combination of having had that management experience for those 7 years and that little career, and then also just being willing to give it a go, and having given it a go a couple of times before. And so it's useful. I mean, there's something really, what I find, what really intrigues me at the moment, and I just delivered a training to a school around this, is Carol Dweck's work on a growth mindset. So in a sense, we can have a process orientation, is one way of looking at it, or we can have an entity orientation. So a kind of process orientation is that you and I, the three of us together in this conversation are more important than the end product. Like, we are important to each other right now. And if we lose each other, then we've lost something. So that's a process orientation. An entity orientation would be, well, as long as I sound good on this podcast, I don't care. Or you might think to yourselves, well, as long as people like it, then we don't care whether or not our relationship is working well. And that kind of process, so that's an entity and a kind of fixed way of looking at things, and a kind of outcome-based way of looking at things. And that's really problematic because if we stray away from the present too much, and if we stray away from the idea that everything's changing all the time, and if we stray away from the idea that we have to fail repeatedly in life in order to discover, in a sense, that's what life is about, isn't it? It's repeated, hopefully fairly small failures rather than catastrophic failures. But the more we make small failures, the less catastrophic failures we make, in a sense. The more failure averse we are, see this with nuclear accidents, for example. They got so many things in place. They're almost really kind of anyway, it creates more risk. So there's this interesting thing about having a growth mindset. And I think when going to university, I started getting a kind of entity mindset, and I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm a first class, like, distinction student. And then I read Dweck, and I was like, wow, that's a terrible idea. It'd be much better if I hadn't have done so well. and I used that in my MA, which I also, got a distinction in. And I think partly because I was just constantly letting go of the idea of getting it, trying to get it too right and trying to not get it wrong. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to learn again, even in my 40s, when I was in my MA, was like, okay, I've just got to go back to that sense of just being growth oriented and failure positive.
That's awesome. It's sort of like you've sort of like coined the whole journey over destination, and then also start before you feel ready. Almost don't be afraid of the failure. Just go and act, and then if you fail, so what? It's cool. That's a growth. And then fail again. That's a growth. Which I think is like a message that for doing anything in life is important, because you're bound to fail at some point. So there's no point not doing it until, because you're afraid of the failure.
And an interesting thing happened, last year. Like, my business lost £20,000 worth of work within like 2 months or something, and I was like, oh shit, like, what happens now?
Yeah.
But what was really interesting was I gave a huge amount of focus to looking after those therapists, and like, just that they were the more important thing, and what was then really embarrassing was that the same, the work, in a sense, that I'd lost for some of my therapists, I was given even more work, which then I thought to myself, well, Christ, do I take that on? And I was really honest with the therapist. I said, look, I've been offered more work. You've been made redundant, by some provision, but they've offered me more work. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to be really honest with them, and I'm going to just put it on the line and say that I think it's better for all of us if I take on this extra work. And what's happened now is, a service level agreement coming through for September for one of those therapists who lost work. She's coming back in again. And so that seemed really important. Even though it's a struggle for me, it was like, okay, I'm just going to maintain the relationships and be present with everybody, and not go into like a thing of like, oh, they're no good, or I've got to kind of keep my cards close here. I can't tell the people who were working for me what's really going on. Instead it was like complete transparency. Be there in the discomfort earlier, and stay in the discomfort longer, in a sense, and then things, if they're meant to be, will come back round again. And that seems to be what's happening. So it's this kind of, it's like, not going for kind of end state stuff, and not going into either or stuff either. So it is also about being aware when we're making kind of judgments, kind of having a judgmental mind, in a sense, and going, okay, well, I've got a judgmental mind about this. Can I drop back into my heart and just and be with these different possibilities, and then know that my heart will direct me somehow toward what is already unfolding. Going back to the idea of the world asking of human beings that they unfold, that we unfold with the world, with the creative force that we're part of.
Wow, yeah, that's really cool. When so I mean, you're through your story, you're obviously quite like intuitive in a sense. You sort of, when did you kind of, I guess, like, dive deeper into like yourself in a spiritual sense, so you could kind of, because like you said, it's like messy, and I think that it's hard. I mean, like you say, creativity is messy, and anyone that's focused on a creative pursuit or is creative themselves can find themselves in a mess, right? Like, life can become messy. So like, how how did you and how do you kind of navigate that mess and keep your mind like okay, sort of, or like, you know, do you have spiritual practices? Do you, I don't know,
Yeah.
meditate? Do you have an exercise you do? Do you like, what's
I
your...
do. Yeah, I mean, I really struggled with meditation, and I also had an amazing Tai Chi teacher during my degree, but I just couldn't. Like, he was he was the real thing. He was Chinese, and he
Yeah.
was like really good, but I was just so bored doing Tai Chi. I just couldn't do it. And meditation, I would continually try from a young age, you know, because I lived in a healing community. So there was meditation all going on, and my brother and I were often trying to meditate and and failing, but could do it for about 30 seconds or a minute or something. What I guess, but now what that's turned into is a meditation practice, toddler allowing, that's like 3 or 4 times a week. I'll meditate for about half an hour, up to 3/4 of an hour. When I'm not meditating, I'm out climbing trees, dancing with trees, being in the park, going running, and doing kind of primal movement stuff. So my partner Leoba's a yoga teacher, and so we're both really into we're into movement, and particularly me having trained as a dance movement psychotherapist. That's the title of my MA. And my main practice during that, you know, when you're training as a creative arts therapist, you have to have a practice that's supporting your training. So I had to have a dance practice that was supporting my training, and that practice is contact improvisation.
Okay.
That's been seriously difficult in the last year or so. But I just went out and did contact improvisation in nature even more. And also because about 7 years ago, I started writing a book called The Antidote, which is about connecting through meditation with trees and nature and mycelial networks. And so I would say that my practice is a combination of kind of active and passive, you know, kind of a yang and yin kind of thing, where if I meditate one day, go out and climb trees and like be silly around them the next day, and kind of to try to do that. So that's one of my practices. The other one is riding a motorbike. I love it. I can find more environmental things to do, because it's, you know, and electric ones. I don't know how environmental really electricity is in general, but anyway, electric ones are really expensive. But there's something about a motorbike. If we lose concentration with the whole of the body, we fall off. And so I love that as a presence technique. You know, it's
gotta be there.
That's very true.
And poetry as well. I had my first book of poetry published when I was 40. The publisher has since died, which was a tragedy. He died young of cancer, but he was a really interesting guy called Jay Ramsey, who'd written lots of books, and so we were involved in a performance poetry troupe together.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And another thing, I guess, was what really brought me to trees. Well, what brought me back to trees in a healing sense, because I'd been a tree surgeon, was discovering didgeridoos. And I taught myself how to play the didgeridoo. I then went and did a lot of busking with the didgeridoo, which was great for me getting out of my own way, you know, that ego thing of like, oh, you can't possibly just go and sit on the side of the road and busk, you know, what will people think, you know? And so I did a lot of busking, and then taught people to play the didge. So that was another little career I forgot to mention. And then, the didgeridoo is, I think, remarkable, both for the way it alters brainwave states, and also how it really gets us in touch with breath. I had quite a bit of trauma when I was a kid because my parents separated when I was young, and it was quite nasty between them. So my dad moved a very long way away, and that was kind of attachment trauma for me. And so I'll find that I'll hold my breath, or I'll try and kind of get all my words out at once and not really let myself
Don't take a breath in.
kind of be in that rhythm. And the didge really helped a lot with that as a practice for many years. I'd say now it's more into the kind of, I'm more into playing the Indian the harmonica. I'm learning the harmonica, but the harmonium.
Oh, awesome.
So my partner and I have a practice of playing the harmonium, but the toddler has put paid to that for a bit.
It would. That's really cool. I mean, I'm a musician, and like aside from the podcast, I'm trying to collaborate with more and more people at the moment, writing songs. So maybe we should talk and we could get some didgeridoo on a song. That would be really cool. That would be really insane. Really cool.
Yeah, it's really nice to have the didge works on. It's really good. I've done a bit of session work for people with the didge. It's
awesome.
It's nice to get a bit of that in there.
Yeah. I've had a go at playing it a few times. It's you don't play it how you'd think you'd play it. Like in my mind, you just sort of blew down it, and you have to do all sorts of lip movements and circular breathing, and bit of an interesting one, eh? But cool.
Yeah. Well, because in a sense, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in life, like we have areas where we're just kind of pretty hopeless in, or at least I do, you know. So one of them I'd like to say in the past is like being able to be in a long-term relationship with someone, you know. That's my current passion or goal in a sense, is can this relationship I'm currently in, you know, can it just really last like right the way through our toddler's upbringing? I would love that, because that would have totally reversed my childhood pattern in a sense, you know. But patterns are really difficult, so we're kind of butting up against our unconscious and against stuff that's just but it is possible to find some way in, you know. And I was hopeless at reading music. Although a friend of mine actually just taught me how to read music, I think in about 10 minutes, and I think I can still kind of remember it, which is down to his amazing kind of musicianship.
Crack the code. If you can crack the code, you can
there was something about the didgeridoo where you don't have to read music. No. It's like, so I can play music without having to read. I thought, I won't be able to play music because I can't read the music because I'm a bit dyslexic and a bit numeralexic as well, as I suggested. And it's like,
I think that's
it's like
great sentiment.
We can find ways of.
I was going to say that, probably what you're about to say, like, that's a great sentiment for, like, if you want to do something, you can find a way of doing it. Like you say, you want to play music, but you don't feel like you can read it or formally play, you know, something that requires a lot of, you know, an instrument that would require you to be able to read, and you can pick up something like the didgeridoo, and you're a musician. You're there. That's
well, and powerful. You know, one of the thoughts I have is like, it's really important not to give each other advice that's based on not knowing what that person is going through, or what they really need from us or from their own life. And in fact, giving advice in general is very tricky, isn't it? It's like, because everybody has, in a sense, a different life, even though there are similarities. We don't know what each of us are going through. Although there are some things that are just good things, you know, that have, that's a weird word, goodness, isn't it? But it seems to be coming up for me that there is such a thing as goodness. We know, and perhaps there's something about then being in the present again that's really important to that. But do you know, just to sidetrack a moment, my daughter Olivia gave me a really good lesson in presence when she was about 7 years old, and she had this tiny little skirt on, and she was sitting next to me in this Beetle that I was driving around, and I was driving too fast because I was late, and I was always late for everything. I was born late, 2.5 weeks late or something. And she just kind of said to me, "Dad, you know you're late." And she was like, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Dad, but if the only thing that exists is the present, then you can't be late." And I was like, I almost stopped the car, because she's only, little. And yeah. So there's something really, really
awesome.
important there. I think what I was trying to say was to loop back on something that I thought about earlier on, which is like being 50 this year, and like having more wisdom, I suppose, than I had when I was 18, when I first became a dad. I still feel that I don't really have that much wisdom, and that most of what I say now might have changed by the time I'm 70 or even 90, hopefully. That there's something about the wisdom of us as we grow older that is irreplaceable. And that's why one of the reasons we really need to care for the people who are older, and care for them, not in the sense of their monetary value, which seems to be a lot of the conversation around, but really care for them to bring their wisdom back in to our culture. And that's something that maybe it's just because I don't want to end up in an old people's home,
It's nice to hear. I think, as when you're younger, that it's almost like the older you get, it doesn't necessarily change. When you're young, when you're really young, when you're a kid, you look at adults and you think, well, they've got everything sorted. They know everything. They know the secret. And you almost grow up expecting one day I'm going to find the secret, and the secret's going to come to me, and I'm going to crack this code. And I think like the secret and the code is the fact that you're probably not. There's no secret. There isn't a code to crack. It's just there is. And I guess that kind of your story and the way you've kind of told it, and the way you've said, the things you've said, that kind of that idea, and it's reassuring in a way, because it's like, okay, like I'm okay then. If I don't know what I'm doing and I can't figure it out, that's okay, because that seems to be the general sort of thing that everyone goes through, eh?
Yeah, we do. I mean, well, just look at what was just announced with Bill and Melinda Gates. I mean, they've just divorced. Like, okay, so in one sense, she can be the fourth richest woman in the world, or the second richest, or whatever, and he can be go down from being the first richest to the fourth richest. I don't know, whatever it is, but it's like, well, they don't know what the fuck's going on then, do they? I mean, they probably thought they had it really sorted, didn't they? I mean, I imagine, if you have everything that you could possibly want, including, deciding to give money to charity and to do all kinds of good causes and things, you'd think that relationship wouldn't have so much stress in it, And yet there's that, and there's Jeff Bezos again. I mean, I love, and I feel sad for that story, for that relationship, but I love the story in a sense that what we all seem to be driven to be focused on, and what I'm also sometimes driven to kind of earn more money and well, I do have a lot of children, I suppose, is that those things, aren't really that important, are they? Because it doesn't matter how much money you have. If you've got a broken heart, you've got a broken heart. And it's like, and that's going to be really painful for your children. And that money's not going to save them. You can, of course, pay for therapy, and that could help if they'll accept it. But it's like that there's something that an Indian mystic said, and I can't remember who it was, but she was definitely female. And she said that we're all fragile. It's like we never lose our fragility, and that's something that's so important. And it's also spoken to by Brené Brown, whose work I admire. Is that vulnerability really? If we can find ways of leaning into our vulnerability, I guess as I grow older, that means leaning into the vulnerability that comes with age, and maybe the wisdom that can also blossom along with that vulnerability.
So well said. Well, you don't look like you're about to turn 50 at all. So
Right, look at all this
yeah,
hair. It's ridiculous. I know this is a podcast, but you would not believe how much black hair I have for being a 50-year-old.
Absolutely.
I put it down to a kind of Kundalini awakening, but we might have to. That might be another podcast, because I don't know how much time we've got left.
Go for it. Honestly,
why not?
like this podcast, we did one the other day that lasted nearly 2 hours.
Yeah,
So
maybe. It doesn't have to be that long.
Yeah.
Is anyone going to listen to it?
Well, at least Liv will. That'll be one person.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the Kundalini awakening was really most powerfully instigated by the didgeridoo.
All right.
And and I've been able to replicate it with one of my students, the Didge students as well. Who's no longer a student, but he found a similar thing. So that's intriguing. Well, the story of the didgeridoo thing is that I was playing the didgeridoo for about half an hour or so, which would have meant that I would have been in quite an altered state. For those of you that don't play the didgeridoo, there's a sense of, or the one of you who's listening to this, the didgeridoo is there's a circular breath to it. That circular breath kind of just changes your physiology quite strongly, but actually can change it to over-breathing or even under-breathing. Because if you're really playing the didgeridoo quite strongly, you can start under-breathing for the amount of energy you're putting into the didge. So who knows where that was, whether it was, more oxygen or less oxygen at that point. And I then just had this vision of a silver spiraling thing. One could call it a snake, but it didn't have a head. It was just a silver spiraling thing, and it was coming up the didgeridoo towards my mouth.
Wow.
And I was like, oh shit, what's that? Oh god, and then what happened is, and I just carried on playing. I mean, by then I'd been playing for a couple of years at least, and so I was like, okay, well, I'll just I couldn't stop then. I was like, well, let's see what happens. And when it entered my mouth, it was a bit like a kind of electric shock, which then went down through my what I'd call my chakras, but anyway, down through my body from my mouth, and then kind of straight down out of my perineum into the ground. And it was like a kind of electric feeling, a sensation. And I remember thinking, oh, that's a bit weird, because it's supposed to go, I thought it was supposed to go the other way, from the coiled serpent in Kundalini yoga at the base of the spine. But that was different. And that then kind of stayed as a loop going through my body for quite some time. I think I'd played probably for another half an hour or so. At that point, I was playing for about an hour at a time without stopping.
Wow.
And so maybe that's why my hair is still
still good
and plentiful.
That's awesome. The age-defying effects of didgeridoo playing. It's a good. Wow.
Yeah, we should market that.
Yeah. Oh wow. I think my parents have a didgeridoo, and you're making me want to go get it and sit there and try and work out to circular breathe, because.
Great. Circular breathing. Well, it's a misnomer really, because it's just blowing air out of your mouth while you breathe through your nose.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And as long as we can do that, which is fairly easy actually, then.
Well, I know what I'm going to spend the rest of the week doing.
Sweet. No, that's really cool. Really, really cool. So are you back kind of obviously now with things easing with the lockdowns and all that, is your business back up and running? Have you got any kind of plans for it or anything else in the near future or in perhaps, further ahead? Or are you really just taking it slow and just allowing the world to just open in its own time?
Well, thank you. That's a lovely question. For me, I'm just finishing a supervision training to be a psychotherapy supervisor. So that's a milestone, I suppose, in my handmade career, if we could call it that. My plan, I guess, is to grow the company a little bit, but I like the small is beautiful idea because it's really important to me to have the sense of community, and also I'm just not very good at figures, so it's better if it's small.
Yeah.
So that's a plan. I want to try and get my book published, but my toddler's sleep isn't going very well, so that keeps kind of being pushed back. I mean, I thought I'd finished the book 2 years ago. I've got so I want to try and sort that out.
That's a goal.
I've then got a children's storybook that I wrote for my toddler, and
nice.
I want to get that properly finished as well. And then I started writing an autobiography based on having grown up around Glastonbury Festival, Glastonbury, and I'd like to carry on writing that.
That's awesome.
Because that was there were various unusual experiences related to Glastonbury, and that might sell because Glastonbury's kind of generally in the news. And then other than that, I think there's something about like balancing things. So I think something I'm not so good at is just creating time for family and just being in it. Like I'm often thinking about the next thing, or I was like, that could be exciting, or I want to do a promotional video of like tree gym kind of stuff, because I do this like tree gymnasium thing, and I want to get rid of gymnasiums and have people back in trees again, because I think we're so closely related to monkeys that there are all kinds of benefits that being in trees. Not least, of course, for our lungs. Given the air quality problems that we have in Bristol and other places, but so there's that as well. But defining space and time for therapy, for therapy, for family, Freudian slip, and trying to maintain those boundaries, because I think that goes back to my core wounding with my parents separating, is that's a struggle. It's like I'm still just a bit anxious in that area. But I think it's going to be supportive, because it will enable me to be a dad and to neither be a single parent nor an absent dad, and for us in our extended family unit. I mean, we go on holiday. My partner and I and our toddler, we're going, for example, on holiday with all the kids, like including my ex-stepdaughter in August. I've just booked that, so it's like, so I want to kind of celebrate the richness of the fruits of all this of all this this handmade lifing that I've done.
Nice. Definitely deserves a celebration, for sure. For sure.
Wow. Cool.
Man, that's incredible. Like, it's so nice to hear, because a lot of, it's just so nice to hear someone's story with, you know, so much kind of thing. Like, you know, you've done the kids, or, you know, you're still doing the kids because you've got your toddler, but you've just done so much, and even how far you are now, like, it's so nice to hear the whole journey, but also that there is still more. Like, there's still more, you know, you're 50 this year and you're not done. And I think it just really ticks that box of, even when you reach the destination that you think is a destination, it's actually not. Like, there's actually more to go.
It's still a journey.
It's the whole, like, going back to kind of what you were saying a moment ago about, you know, you think that amount of money, like, you strive for that amount of money, but then you get it and it doesn't fulfill it. And that's because you've hit that amount of money, so you want the next one. And it's the same thing, you know, you've hit this destination, but actually you've got to it and it's like, you can't kind of see it because there's just so much more. And it's just so awesome and also, like, with the creativity, it just really relates, especially to Ben with all the creativity and stuff. And it's just, yeah, like,
So cool.
It's inspiring. And yeah, no, I'm really glad that Liv threw you on and threw you into this space and gave us this opportunity, as well as to you for just hearing it all.
Well, thanks. I've really enjoyed your questions and your listening, you know, and that's a really intriguing thing, isn't it? Making space for other people to tell their story and to share. That's a very potent thing. So I feel really appreciative of you both to offer this space and to bring the quality of your listening and your questions and your feeling inspired by our conversation today. Yeah,
Anytime.
thank you.
Anytime, but also, of course, thank you to you as well. Just finishing off with a couple of questions, but my mind has gone blank. So I've got one, and for some reason the other one that we always ask has just gone out of my mind.
Well, I could think of them, so...
Go on then, you throw it first.
Do the one you're thinking of.
Okay, so the one is just in my mind is your mantra.
Yeah.
What is your mantra? If any, maybe it changes every day. What is your mantra for the day, for the week, the year? What do you go by?
Well, one mantra I've been working with for a while, because I can't remember the one that Anna gave me a while ago. One mantra I work with is, I am healthy, wealthy, loving, and loved.
That's beautiful.
Nice.
And sometimes I try and find slightly different poetic versions of that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's good.
I'm intrigued by the power of mantra and affirmation, but I'm also intrigued by what it sets up. Like that if I'm affirming something, that I want to be careful with that. I want to play with it. I want to do it over and over again, and at the same time take it lightly, because otherwise it can set up a kind of friction. And because I don't really know what's going on, it's important to take it lightly. But if I'm making a decision, I try and make the decisions based on that, even if I'm not feeling any of those four things.
I guess it's also like, you can look at even the word wealthy. You can look at that in
Numerous
so many
ways,
different
ways. Like, to some, it may just instantly think of money, but actually it could be something completely different.
Yeah, rich in experience.
So those words can just play around in so many ways, as in how you connect with them.
And words do seem to have a lot of power, don't they?
Definitely.
Yes, they do.
Definitely do.
Awesome.
But any other questions, Ben?
Well, it's the grand experience question.
Grand experience.
Is
there
a grand experience you're yet to have that you would like to have? And what we mean by grand experience is, I guess, we used to ask the question, what is a bucket list item of yours? But bucket list, most people gravitate to like a travel destination, whereas grand experience equates to sort of something you want to do, something you're yet to sort of, like an idea. I mean, like like a performer might say they want to play Wembley, or our friend who used to be in the military, he's putting on a charity event for his ex-military colleagues and things like this. So something like this to give you some ideas. But is there one?
But it could also be like even the book that you want to finish.
Yeah,
and
it
stuff.
could be. You have listed quite a lot, so you could just pull one of them out, I think. Yeah.
The grand experience.
If you don't have any either, then that's totally cool.
It's also cool. It might be a good.
I'm just gonna go for. There's something a teenage client of mine said earlier on today when we were doing an empty chair exercise, and he's just got an incredible reflective capacity. So he's only 13. And then I had him sit in a chair where he was 23, and then sit in another chair where he was 43, and then another one where he was 73.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was looking back at his life as a 73-year-old, and there was a wig involved.
Awesome.
And he said these just amazing things. And he said things like, he's like, when I'm old, I want to remember all the stuff that I've achieved, and I want to tell my 13-year-old self that anything you want to do is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And in the kind of because the way I do therapy is I want my clients to affect me as much as I affect them. I don't think it works to do it just one way. Life is a reciprocal street, and so I need to be affected by them. So he's still affecting me in a sense in my thinking. And so I think to myself, a grand, a bucket on my bucket list, or the destination, in a sense, is to be an old man with lots of white hair, and to spend the last year or so of my life with lots of quality time with people I love, with my children.
Wow.
Who won't be children at all anymore by then. And that would be an amazing experience. And for there to be an honesty about that. Mm-hmm. That there isn't a sense of oh, I wish you weren't going, because actually we're all going, there to where we've had our lives. That's a necessity. It's a given. Mm-hmm. And I would like there to be a sense in our family, given all the different traumas in the background of our kind of family system, that we're able to be with each other, and that they're able to be with one another when I'm an old guy, and I'm letting go, and I'm just remembering, I'm just being with all of the wonderful and terrible and all the in-between and the boring things that have happened in life. And
that's awesome. That's incredibly deep, but really cool. Really cool. Awesome. Nice. I like it.
Thank you so much, honestly. Thank you so
Well, Laura and Benedict, that's a pleasure.
Yes, cool.
But no, it's been a pleasure as well. Really has.
You have been listening to the Less Trodden Path podcast with Laura and Benedict. Make sure you subscribe to us on whichever platform it is you're using. If you would like to feature on the Less Trodden Path podcast, then head over to our website, thelesstroddenpath.com. Thank you for listening. The Less Trodden Path podcast is sponsored by imakesounds.com, music for content creators. If you're looking for royalty-free music to feature on your own podcast, blogs, YouTube videos and more, then head over to imakesounds.com.